Western democracies need a New Deal. Having dismissed their poverty as a personality defect and their zero-hour contracts as efficiency gains, the deep establishment is looking on in despair as a nationalist international triumphs. Two are its handmaidens: involuntary underemployment, the bitter price of austerity, and involuntary migration, the bitter fruit of concentrating decent jobs in small areas. People do not move to London because of the theatre scene or to Britain because of the weather. They move because they must. Neither globalization nor electrified border fences can fix this. It is delusional to believe that Britain or America can prosper sustainably when neighboring nations are in crisis. The cure is decent jobs with a right to a living wage, healthcare, education, and social housing in people's own communities. This is why we need a New Deal on both sides of the Atlantic, a new Bretton Woods that conceives of investment in people's communities in the same way that the Green Movement conceives of climate change, a joint responsibility of a species whose interests are intertwined. We also need to establish a right to universal basic income. Fear of machines that can liberate us from drudgery is a sign of a timid and divided society. The Luddites are amongst the most misunderstood historical agents. Their vandalism of machinery was not a protest against automation. It was against social arrangements that deprived them of life prospects in the face of technological innovation. Our societies must embrace the rise of the machines, but ensure that they contribute to shared prosperity. Every citizen must be granted property rights over part of the wealth that the machines produce. We need to establish a universal basic income to be funded from the returns of capital, not tax. It's what I call a universal basic dividend. This will allow us to spread the returns from automation to the whole of society. In June 2015, something quite remarkable happened in Europe. The European Central Bank closed down Greece's commercial banks during a terse negotiation between Greece and its creditors. The European Central Bank at the time and its president Mario Draghi claimed that they were doing their job impartially. They were not participating in the political process of asphyxiating the Greek government, and that they were acting legally within the rule book of the European Central Bank. But is that the case? Clearly, the president of the European Central Bank, Mr. Draghi, was not sure about that. He was not sure about the legality of his actions. We know that because Apparently, he commissioned a legal opinion from an independent private law firm to find out if what he was doing was legal. Now, shouldn't we be able, as European citizens, to read that legal opinion? Fabio De Masi, a member of European Parliament representing Die Linke and the European Party of the Left, filed an application to have this, a copy of this legal opinion. Mr. Draghi wrote back saying that he can't share the legal opinion that he commissioned because of reasons of confidentiality and needing to protect the private law firm that had delivered the report. Now, since then, Fabio and I contacted a law professor, a professor of public European and international law from the University of Bremen, an authority in his field, who gave us his own legal opinion that Mr. Draghi has no leg to stand on in refusing access to the legal opinion that he paid for using European citizens' money. DiEM25, the Democracy in Europe movement, is today beginning a campaign for collecting signatures to add to a list, an array of signatories, demanding from the European Central Bank and Mr. Mario Draghi that he releases, on the basis of a mass freedom of information action, this legal opinion for all to see. Signatories of the DiEM25 petition are Benoît Hamon, the Socialist Party's presidential candidate in the forthcoming presidential election in France, Katja Kipping, the co-president, co-chair of Die Linke in Germany, Gesine Schwan, twice the SPD's candidate for the presidency of the Federal Republic of Germany, Fabio De Masi, and myself. Plus, a long list of distinguished academics from Germany, from France, from the United Kingdom, from the United States. We want your support. We want you to join the petition that DiEM25 is commencing immediately, in order to force transparency to become a matter of fact in Frankfurt. Remember, the European Central Bank has immense power. It has the power to close down your banks in Europe at the drop of a hat. If that power is used without transparency and arbitrarily, there is no democracy in Europe. Join us.
Hello? Okay, sorry, we're just going to give it another couple of minutes, guys. Thanks for your patience, because we're just waiting on a couple more people coming. And William and Yanis have said, give them another couple of minutes to see if any more show up. Okay, so just another couple of minutes, then we'll start.
of Europe, and you look at events that are happening the USA, the events in Brazil, and throughout the globe, that it does feel that winter is coming, that storm clouds are indeed on the horizon, and they're coming closer and closer to each one of us. The liberal consensus politicians, the centrists of Europe, of the Western world, have been sleepwalking towards this crisis for decades. And increasingly today we see that the populist far right are positively goose-stepping us towards the abyss. And Day M25 represents a step in the right direction, a step away from the edge. So Day M25 is a pan-European movement, and it crosses the whole political spectrum. It brings progressives together to offer an alternative to the rupture and the fragmentation that we see in society and throughout Europe. Locally, Day M25 is a growing movement here in Ireland, and in Belfast we've great colleagues like Councillor John Barry of the Green Party. We have the President of Queen's Student Union, the ever-inspiring Sean Fearon of Sinn Féin. We have colleagues like Joe Baird from the Cooperative Party and Peter Dines, Leonie Hannon from the Labour Party, and it's about bringing together these differing political viewpoints together into one shared idea and to build a discourse around this. So tomorrow, Yanis Varoufakis travels to Amsterdam, and it's quite an important date in the Netherlands. It may not be one that you're familiar with, and it may not be one that people in the Netherlands are particularly familiar with. It's the 25th of February, and it's important for this reason. In 1941, in occupied Holland, the Nazi forces started implementing anti-Jewish laws. And a number of trade unions got together, and although their membership were overwhelmingly non-Jewish, they decided to call a general strike, and it went down in history as the February strike. It lasted barely more than 24 hours before it was brutally crushed. I say this as well because I'm thinking that a couple of days ago we remembered the anniversary of the murder of Sophie Scholl, who was a 21-year-old student in Germany and who was arrested for handing out leaflets calling for people to rise up against the Nazi government. And she paid with her life as part of the White Rose resistance movement. Yanis Varoufakis comes from Greece, and some of you may be aware that he served in government with a man called Manolis Glizos, who was elected to the Greek parliament in his 90s. He was arrested in 2012 before Syriza were elected, protesting austerity out on the streets with his people. But he's a national hero in Greece because in 1941, as a 19-year-old, in protest at the Nazi occupation of his country, he scaled the Acropolis and tore down the swastika. And I'm also reminded of a story that Kieran Crossy, hopefully some of you know Kieran Crossy, from the International Brigades Memorial Trust, and he's an authority on the Spanish Civil War. But at an event last year when we were commemorating the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, he told a story about numerous volunteers that left Ireland to go and fight for democracy in Spain. The part that moved me most was, and beg my pardon, I've forgotten the name of the guy, but in the very final days of the Spanish Civil War, a volunteer left Ireland to go and fight in Spain, and Kieran said he was either a lunatic or the most bravest and courageous man that you can imagine, because he went not to win a war, just to take part in it. He knew defeat was inevitable. So why do you Because these are examples of resistance at the heart of winter, at the coldest, darkest time and moments, that people could still offer an alternative and see a vision of a better humanity. We are not there yet. Winter is coming, but the challenge that DayM calls for is for us to stand together and stand against the dark, ominous clouds of rupture that can lead us nowhere. And that's why I would urge you all to join and be part of DayM 25. Thank you.
Okay, and without further ado, I think we'll need to introduce our host for tonight. You'll know him from BBC, many different programmes, especially Talkback. It's William Crawley.
Normally the biggest brain in the room. He certainly was today with me, because we were the only two in the room. But our audience just went for him. They just asked him questions about anything. And he's such an accommodating speaker and thinker and generous thinker. So when I asked a dumb question, he made me sound clever. He made me sound interesting by taking the question and reworking it. So like, trust yourself. When we come to the question time, you're going to enjoy being in conversation with Yanis. All the way to the end of our program, we even had Dolores from Rathco rang in, and she just wanted to tell me she thought it was lovely. Charming, absolutely. I said, "Joe, are you flirting with Yanis Varoufakis?" And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "If he looks as good as he sounds," she said. Oh, I said, "Go on to our Twitter account. We've got a picture." I go there right away. Please welcome Yanis Varoufakis. All right, so the format is we'll chat for a while, and then we'll bring the audience in and widen out this conversation. Obviously, I want to talk to you, Yanis, about your period as the finance minister in Greece, about what's happening in Europe today, about your books and your ideas. But it all starts somewhere in your story. Can I start really at the very beginning with your formation in Greece, your intellectual formation, your cultural formation? Let's kind of get a sense of who you are and where you come from. Tell us about the Greece into which you were born.
I grew up in a dictatorship. a military dictatorship. It happened when I was 6. The tanks rolled on the streets of Athens and the rest of the country, and we descended into a dark 7-year-long cloud of fascism, effectively. Interestingly, my mother grew up in a dictatorship in the 1930s, so it's a recurring effect in Greece, or at least was. Fingers crossed. My father was born and raised in Cairo, Egypt, to a Greek father and a weird mother, in the sense that she was, I think she was of French descent, but she was raised by a Greek family, but had a French education, French Catholic education, and she was a feminist and an atheist and a general revolutionary of the French Enlightenment era. So my father had this multicultural background, which rubbed off on me. To cut a long story short, it was a very interesting time, in the sense that there was the combination of the darkness of the dictatorship, the extreme hope that only a dictatorship can create. Why am I saying that? Because when you live under a military dictatorship, you can identify the villains. You see them on television, they speak to you. I mean, the Hitlerites. You think, okay, well, all we need to do is get rid of them. And then everything's going to be hunky-dory. Whereas in bleak times of the kind that we have been experiencing more recently, in our democracies, in our liberal democracies, when we feel that our liberal democracies are not particularly democratic and they're just fig leaves for forces behind the scenes which are not in control of, it's much more difficult to identify the villains of the piece. So there was a lot of hope, a lot of brutality, fantastic culture, and a sense of being part of an era that was pregnant with good things.
Did your family experience that brutality?
Well, my father spent 4.5 years in a concentration camp.
I think that's a yes.
Accidentally.
Yes, yeah.
Accidentally, which is amazing to spend 4.5 years in concentration.
This is a prison island.
A prison island. Many people died. Constant,
yeah,
inhuman torture, and all because he, as a student leader, he ended up being a student leader because he was a UFO. He had arrived in Athens like a UFO from Cairo, didn't know anything about the place, had never lived there. It was a lull during the civil war in Greece, so both sides, the extreme right and the left, who were at the time trying to accommodate a kind of Good Friday agreement, Greek style. And they saw this UFO from Cairo, Egypt, saying, okay, do you want to be the president of the Students' Union because you're somebody that doesn't offend anyone, simply because you've just arrived from outer space? He said yes. A couple of months later, the university authorities doubled the fees, student fees, at a time when students were malnourished. So my father thought, my duty as a Students' Union leader is to go to the rector and complain, which he did very, very politely with his tie and his suit and, typical French Enlightenment person. And then on the way out, after he had made his point to the rector, secret police grabbed him, took him to a cell, beat him up. Then the good cop comes and says, oh, sorry about that, you know how these provincial officers are, you can't control them. Sign this piece of paper, you go home. And the piece of paper was a denunciation of communism. My father said, I'm not a communist, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not Muslim, but if you ask me, as a representative of the state, to denounce Islam or Buddhism, I'm not going to do it. It's not your job to make me denounce any faith, which I may or may not have. So he ended up in a concentration camp for 4.5 years.
You were educated in Athens, but then moved as a university student to the United Kingdom. Was that because there were security concerns about you as you got to that university age?
Well, many of my cohort moved to England to study.
Yeah.
But it is true that when at the age of, how old was I, 15? One night I didn't come home because I was arrested by police for political activities. When I did arrive home, my father said to me, right, you're going to study in England. I don't know what you study, anything from astronomy to zoology, but you're not staying here to become like me.
They were worried, yeah.
Yes, of course they were worried. Because remember, this was only a couple of years after the collapse of the dictatorship. It was not at all clear that another one was not going to return.
Why did you end up studying economics?
Oh, completely by accident. I was going to do physics, but a Greek politician who left his mark in Greece, Andreas Papandreou, was prime minister for 8 years, so maybe more. Before he became prime minister, because I was involved with the political party that he was leading in the 1970s, volunteered to give me a reference letter to go to Britain to study actually mathematical physics. And he said to me, it was quite astonishing actually, that he would spend half an hour or so with a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, whatever I was. So he asked me, so you want to do mathematical physics? No, you're not. I said, well, why am I not? He said, well, because you are clearly politically engaged. If you study physics, no one's going to take you seriously in the sphere of politics. But if you do mathematical economics instead of mathematical physics, the mathematics is exactly the same. The labels, instead of having pressure, you have income. And instead of having voltage, you have inflation. But the mathematics is exactly the same, and people will take you seriously. They don't. It's not right that they should, but they will. And so I went to the University of Essex to study mathematical economics. But then, about a month into the economics part of the course, I was so bored with the economics part that I dumped it. Yeah. And I only did mathematics. And I thought this was a clean getaway from economics. And then I did my master's in mathematics. So I thought I was scot-free. But you know how fate is. Actually, the reason why
you thought of a better answer.
I'll tell you what there isn't. I just thought about it. The reason is we did not have digitization of the internet.
He's an economist.
We didn't have the internet then, you see. Because it was only by accident that I did a PhD in economics. And I'll tell you what the accident was. I was at the University of Birmingham library late at night. I think it was July 1982. And I was trying to find a topic to do my dissertation as a mathematical statistician. And it was late at night, and I made a mistake. Instead of going to the third floor of the library, I went to the second floor. And in the quasi-darkness of the building, I ended up picking up a volume which I thought was a statistics journal, but it was the American Economic Review. And out of curiosity, I opened it up, and there was an article in there, an academic article, scientific paper, which was claiming to prove that trades unions are dumb and employers are smart, mathematically and statistically. I thought, I need to read this. Next morning, I saw my advisor and I said, I want to take this apart. Can I? He said, yeah, fine. So I started looking at the mathematics and statistics of it. And the rest is history.
The rest is
I ended up doing a PhD in economics.
You know that story about the Indian economist who tries to explain his own personal approach to reincarnation? He says if you're a really good economist, you will come back in the next life as a physicist. But if you're a really, really bad, wicked, evil economist, you'll come back as a sociologist.
Well, there's a point to this.
I guess economics
I would actually make it. I know you have a religious studies background, so I hope I don't offend you. My view of economics is that it is a very toxic religion with equations.
I'm just thinking that through.
No, it's easy, because just like a religion, it's a closed system.
Where's the Vatican in economics?
Oh, I'll tell you where it is.
Where is it?
I'll tell you where it is. It's called, in Britain, it's the research assessment exercise structure, which creates a hierarchy of academic journals, the canon.
The canon, yeah.
Without which you simply don't progress. Now, in physics, you need the canon, because there is something called nature, which doesn't give a damn about our theories concerning nature, and therefore it acts as an arbiter of our theoretical models. So if I come up with a theory and then the application of the theory is an aeroplane that doesn't fly, my theory gets junked
Yeah.
But in economics, no theory gets junked because every theory can explain the facts after the event. And therefore, like any religion, there is no empirical observation that can shoot it down. Therefore, this is is there any phenomenon that would ever persuade a Christian, a Muslim, or a Buddhist that they're wrong? No.
Not a well-informed
Whatever
one,
happens
no. Yeah.
can always be explained within the canon. So that's just like economics. And the proof of that is that no economic theory has ever died. There's always some economist somewhere who believes in it. Now, whereas, in physics, the Aristotelian physics, I don't believe there's any physicist who believes that the Earth is flat and the 5 elements are earth, wind, fire, whatever.
I don't know if it's true, but they say that in economics is the only discipline where 2 economists can share a Nobel Prize for contradictory claims.
And claim, in one of them, thinking that the other one is a charlatan.
Yeah. And they share the prize. Gosh.
But it's precisely because of this.
Have you considered meteorology as a better discipline? Maybe forecasting the weather might be more accurate.
Of course it is a better discipline. It is a discipline. Economics is a sham. But economics is the language in which politics is narrated.
Yeah.
And therefore economics is extremely important because all the decisions that determine your life, my life, our life, is couched in the language of economics. It's the reason why Voltaire had to know the Bible better than the bishops.
So let's come to the politics. I know you don't like this question, but you have described yourself as a libertarian communist.
Yes, a contradiction.
It's a contradiction, but let's break it down a bit and explode the contradiction. Why libertarian?
Well, because I dislike authority. I dislike the state. I dislike people telling people what to do. And I think that this is a very healthy way of being. At the same time, we need authority, we need hierarchy, we need to organize society in a way that makes life more tenable for the majority. And I think it is important to maintain both. To maintain a healthy disregard for authority while trying to organize life in a manner which makes sense. So, but you see, I don't think this is a unique position. I'm not claiming any innovation here. Take Karl Marx. Marx clearly disliked the state in the sense of being very skeptical about the capacity of states to be in tune with human liberty and ethics. But at the same time, he believed that it was an important instrument to get us to the stage where we would need it. And he advocated that in the good society, the state would wither. Now, that sounds very much like a libertarian communist. So I'm not claiming any...
A small state, a diminishing state, no state.
Well, Star Trek. Think about it. Star Trek.
You're not doing the Star Trek joke again, are you?
It's not a joke.
All right, go for it.
It's the ideal communism. I'm a Trekkie. Why? Because, not that they are great pieces of art, but think about it. Fantastic technology, non-working. You have a hole in the wall providing you with anything you need. Food, clothes, whatever. You have the replicators doing all the work for human beings. And human beings can have philosophical discussions about the meaning of life, exploring the universe. And whatever conflict they have is about the interesting aspects of life. So technology is a liberator, but whether it works as a liberator as opposed to an oppressor depends on politics and whether we are democratic and capable of sharing the great stuff that machines can do for us instead of becoming their slaves.
Obviously, writers like Marx were influential on you as you were growing up. Who was influential in the world around you in shaping your political perspective in your 20s when you were kind of forming your mind?
Well, my family to begin with. I mean, my mother was a woman who started life as a proto-feminist in the sense that she went against the grain. She was the first student of chemistry at Athens University. When she entered the chemistry school, she was the first female student. She faced immense opposition. that came in a variety of forms. Then when she moved into industry as a biochemist, she faced exploitation, inequality. She was collecting 1/4 of the wage of men, and she fought what she considered to be an ethical battle against this until she realized that there is a whole thing called feminism. And then in the 1970s she joined the feminist movement in Greece, and together with other women they would hire coaches, and they would go around the countryside trying to convince women that it was not the natural order of things, that they should be beaten up by men and forced to keep quiet. So, when you have a mother like that, and a father who spent 4.5 years in a concentration camp because he would not denounce something he didn't believe in.
Amazing. Extraordinary.
That's a pretty good influence to begin with.
I would say so. Yeah. You're naturally drawn to activism. Naturally, you're a joiner in a sense, aren't you? When you're at university, you're joining groups that are campaigning for social and political and economic change. It seems like you've always, in your earliest days as a university student, believed in the power of organisation. That it wasn't enough just to be on your own as an individual denouncing the world, but you've got to get organised.
That's right, but at the same time I found it very, very hard to belong to a political party.
Yes.
So I joined lots of organizations, and I wanted to belong, and I wanted to be in a political party, except that there wasn't one that I could...
The Libertarian Communist Party didn't exist.
Didn't exist,
yeah.
No. I did have a period in the CPGB. There were some nice people from the Communist Party of Great Britain where I used to study. But of course, it was a joke of a party.
They're all Blairites now, aren't they?
Yeah, but this is my fate as a left-winger. I'm 56 now, so I'm old enough to have had many comrades on the left, since the late 70s, early 80s, and many students of mine from my university career who, they would see me on the street. I'm talking now in the 1990s, 2000s, and they would say to me, "Oh, hi, Yanis, how are you? I remember your lectures very fondly. You're not still a lefty, are you?" And these were people who were attacking me from the left for being too right-wing. And now they were bankers, they were in finance, they were insurers, whatever they were, and they were looking down upon me for having remained stuck in those old ideals. I don't mind remained stuck in old ideals, as long as those ideals are still helpful in explaining the world we live in today. But I always wanted to belong. I was a finance minister of the Syriza government, and I was not even a member of Syriza.
Well, you said that today. I was wondering about that. I mean, they obviously thought you were.
No, they didn't. No,
they didn't think you were a member.
No,
because you were registered in the parliament as a member, weren't you?
No, I was an associate. I contested the election as an associate of Syriza, but not a member of Syriza.
Like sort of special status in relation to the European Union. Yes.
And the reason why that was because, look, I was very critical of Syriza.
But you are listed as a Syriza MP.
I was a Syriza MP, but not a party member. So I collaborated with Syriza in the election.
Right.
Kind of front. But I was never... And interestingly, when Alexis Tsipras, who then became the prime minister, offered me, before the election that we won, the finance ministry, we were in his flat in downtown Athens, and he came up with this offer, which I found astonishing, but nevertheless. So we spent hours discussing this, whether I wanted to do it, under what conditions I would accept it, what the policy should be. And then towards the end, in the wee hours of the morning, I said to him, "Does this mean now that I have to become a member of Syriza?" I was quite happy to say yes if he said yes. He said, No. I don't want you to be a member of Syriza because you will have more degrees of freedom as a finance minister. If you're not a member of Syriza, you will not have to accept collective responsibility of the Central Committee and so on and so on. And this is more useful to me to have a finance minister. In other words, somebody I can blame for things.
Yes.
Given that he's not a member of the party.
Did he honour that in the end?
Yes, he did honour it. He blamed me for everything.
Yeah.
Or he allowed others to blame me for everything while he kept quiet.
We're jumping ahead, but before we get to this point where you're getting into politics in one form or another with Syriza, you travel around the world. You live in the United States for a while, teaching in Seattle, teaching in Texas at the University of Austin, the University of Texas.
Don't forget the 12 years in Sydney, Australia.
I was going to mention that. You were in Sydney, you were in Cambridge, you've been in Essex, you're traveling around a lot. As you're traveling, are you putting together a perspective on how the power dynamics of the world actually work, how the economics of the globe actually work? What hangs together in all of that?
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? We have been living in a globalized world ever since we left Africa.
Yeah.
As a human species. And there's no way of understanding the here and now unless we understand the past and the global. My peripatetic existence has a number of explanations and motivations. But yes, I always wanted to gain a perspective from different parts of the world. The problem is that with the British Empire and the Anglosphere, as I call it, that it's quite homogeneous.
Yes,
whether you're in Sydney, in Texas, in Seattle, in Belfast.
The coffee shops look the same.
In the end, the Anglosphere has this capacity to, Asia becomes something that you fly over when you go from Sydney to London. So I had to try to make stopover in Bangkok, in Indonesia, and so on, and lose myself in the crowds in order to gain that sense of globalism that we are all experiencing, and the locality.
Did you have any experience of China?
Not as much as I wanted to. The problem with China is the language. Well, my problem with China is the language. I wish I could speak Chinese. The first time I got into China, I effectively defected to China without realizing it.
Of course you did.
No, I used to live in, it was a time when I lived in Sydney, and I really wanted to go to China, but it was very early on in the piece. It was 1989 to 1990. China had not really opened yet. And I was in Macau, which was still Portuguese at the time. And I bribed a border guard with something like $5, to let me walk into China. And I kept going. And I thought, wow, I'm in China. So I kept walking. And until I realized I arrived at the village, and people were looking at me very, very strangely because they had never seen a Westerner in that part of the world. And I just felt that this was a country that I dearly liked to understand, but which I was absolutely incapable of understanding because of the language barrier. But nevertheless, I tried. So I got on a train, and I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't even understand which toilet I should go into when I needed to go to the loo, because there was one ideogram here and then one there. They looked the same to me. So, but anyway, my relationship with China is one of constant frustration, because the more I understand, the less I know. Interestingly, during my short stint as finance minister, I had an excellent relationship with the Chinese. And there was a fantastic opportunity for an alliance, an economic alliance between Greece and China, which, of course, was scuttled by Berlin.
Well, let's come right to that then.
Yeah.
Your period as finance minister. We're in 2015 now. We're trying to do a bit of your life. Alexis Tsipras likes you as a possible finance minister. You already have a reputation, not just in Greece at this point, but more internationally. As you told us today on our program, I think it was 2003 or 4, in writing, you laid out a prediction about a real estate boom that was going to turn into a banking crash. One of the few economists to do that. And then the consequences of that crash descend upon your own country, Greece, which is effectively bankrupt at that point. I don't want to say effectively bankrupt. It's bankrupt at that point.
Absolutely.
And you're being offered the opportunity to become the finance minister of a bankrupt state.
That's right.
Interesting offer.
Not an enviable position to be in. But look, it was not. I never wanted to be a politician, a member of parliament, or a minister. I always wanted to be an academic, a commentator, an activist, a citizen. Being a citizen for me was the most important thing.
But was that because you didn't want to accept the responsibilities that comes with office?
Well, I think I told you today. It's the same reason why when I was in universities I never wanted to be dean, head of department, vice chancellor, because if you're lucky enough to be a lecturer or a professor, which means that you have plenty of time to read, write, and teach, why do you want to be an administrator? For the same reason I didn't want to be a minister. I wish somebody could do the job well, and I could vote for them. That was my.
But it's certainly
my
easier,
preference.
It's easier to stand on the sidelines, isn't it, and to protest
that's right.
from the side.
And this is why I accepted the position, because there comes a moment when you have to put your money where your mouth is. For 5 years, I was criticizing Greek governments, a succession of Greek governments, for extending and pretending our bankruptcy, for pretending that we were not bankrupt by means of new loans that were added on existing non-payable loans on conditions of shrinking our income. And I was constantly lambasting them for doing that and coming out with alternative proposals of how the debt could be managed, restructured, what kind of fiscal policy we needed in order to kickstart the economy, what kind of reforms we needed. And then here comes a young man, Alexis Tsipras, who says, according to the opinion polls, I'm going to be prime minister in a month, and I want you to be finance minister because I believe in what you're saying, and you're the only one who can actually put it into practice. So I said, oh God. Now I just have a moral obligation to accept, which is a good thing. I do believe in reluctant politicians. I would never trust anyone, man or woman, who wants to be minister. It's something that you should do only as public service, despite the fact that you would rather read and write. So I accepted the deal, but under very strict conditions, because I knew that we were going to have a massive fight in our hands. And the reason why we had a massive fight in our hands, and it was clear that we would, is because we had creditors who did not want their money back. Now, this is a very tough negotiation. If you're a businessman or woman and you owe money to the bank and you can't repay it, and you have to go to the bank and renegotiate the loan and restructure it, you are facing a bank manager who has an incentive to come to an agreement with you, because if they don't and you go bankrupt, they lose their money. They want their money back. So if you'd say to them, look, let's find an accommodation so that you get the most back of what I owe you. You can't get everything back because I'm in trouble. But let's organize our affairs in such a way that will return to you the most that you can get back from my operation. So help me grow my business so that you can get most of it back. They have an incentive to say, okay, let's do it. And then, of course, you negotiate on the particularities of the restructure. But when you have a creditor who really don't care about their money, because it's not really their money, it's taxpayers' money. But what they care about is teaching the people of Spain, the people of Italy, the people of Ireland, a lesson that if you dare elect somebody like Varoufakis, okay, you are going to get seriously clobbered. Then it's very, very difficult to have a conversation with them that seeks common ground on the basis of mutual advantage.
Now, the academic in you probably approached these negotiations in this period in your life thinking, this is about ideas, this is about mathematics, this is about the numbers, it's about logic and rationality. And then you discover that politics isn't actually about those things. It's about something, a different kind of dynamic, about power, about influence.
No, I didn't discover it once I was in office. I knew it before.
So you knew that's what you were... Did you know you were going to defeat then?
No, I didn't know we were going to go to defeat. Look, let me put it this way. I knew exactly what you said, that this is not about mutual advantage. It was not about an economic problem in search of a technological, technocratic objective solution.
That would be easy.
It was a power play, that it had to do with a demonstration effect hitting us so that the Spaniards would learn their lessons and not vote for Spain's Syriza called Podemos. I knew all that. And remember I told you that when Tsipras and I had this conversation, we actually had it many times. The final one was in November of 2014 when he offered me the finance ministry. What I said to him was more or less what you're saying. I said, look, the moment we get elected, if we get elected, we're going to receive a telephone call from the European Central Bank telling us that unless we ditch our program and unless we do as we're told, they will close our banks down within a month. This is the first thing, the power play. Secondly, unless we have a deterrent in our inside pocket by which to stop them in their tracks and prevent the bank closures, then we might as well not get elected. The deterrent has to take the form of ABC, counter threats, retaliation. If you close my banks down, I will firstly haircut the bonds of the Greek government that you own and therefore create serious problems for your quantitative easing program throughout the Eurozone. Right. Secondly, I'm going to activate a parallel payment system so that I can demonstrate to you that I can maintain a system for making payments across Greece so that not everything grinds to a halt once you close down my banks. And thirdly, that I fear the perpetuation of this extending and pretending of the bankruptcy to the future more than I fear being thrown out of the Eurozone. If I can signal this to the creditors, then they will come to us with a decent, viable agreement. Not everything we want, a painful compromise, but one which would be viable. This was what I said to Alexis Tsipras. And if you agree that we're going to do this, then I will come in. If you don't, then get somebody else. And he agreed. But the reason why we were defeated was not because it was predetermined. The reason why we were defeated was because halfway during that process, significant members of the government signaled to the creditors, don't listen to Varoufakis, we will pull the plug on him, give us a good deal, and we will ditch him. And of course, at that point, they were toast. I didn't care about me personally. I wanted there to do a job for them. But they undermined themselves by trying to cut a deal with the creditors behind my back. That's
some of them.
That's the painful truth.
Well, some of them give a different account, don't they? And they say that you became, impossible to work with. You were like a child in a room.
Who said that?
I know you're working on a new book called Adults in the Room. Yeah. Right. You were the child in the room. You were like,
I never said this
you were
about
like
me.
A petulant adolescent in these negotiations with the Troika.
But you see, this is not true. In all the conversations I had with people that mattered, and I'll name names. Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund.
Who used the phrase adults in the room.
Yes. Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister. Pierre Moscovici, the economics and finance commissioner in Brussels. These were the people that I was negotiating with. Paul Thompson, the IMF's Europe desk chief. Not one of them ever said to me that what I was telling them was wrong. That there was a flaw in my argument. Not one of them. There was a very interesting conversation with Christine Lagarde in which very early on in our relationship, she said something quite astonishing, which just counters the point you're making. She said, well, listen, Yanis, of course you're right. This program, the fiscal consolidation, the austerity and the loans and so on, this program cannot work. Now, let me pause for a second. Do you get the significance of it?
I do, yes.
Not that it is difficult to make it work. It cannot work.
It's theoretically impossible.
It's like the circle. You cannot square the circle. It's not a question of how good you are a mathematician. It cannot be done.
It can't work.
So I'll go back to what you were saying. I know what you're saying is right. It cannot work. But you must understand that we have put so much political capital in it that we cannot go back. And your credibility, my credibility as a politician, depends on accepting it. And of course, the answer to this is I was not elected to care about my credibility with you folks. I was elected to make this work. And I'm not going to accept a program which you're telling me can never work. What does this mean? It means a humanitarian crisis. It means people going to bed hungry. It means children fainting at school from malnutrition. That's what it means. There is a human cost involved. So I'm going to accept to be co-opted to the program in which you have invested political capital so as to maintain myself as a politician? No, I don't care enough for this. The job doesn't pay that well, and I don't want it. I'm here in order to restructure the Greek debt and impose a fiscal policy upon Greece with reforms, painful reforms. You want us to take a bitter medicine? Let's take bitter medicine. don't give me toxic waste to drink because you have invested in it. Now, if that means that I was impossible to deal with, I was impossible to deal with. That's what people elected me for. You see, the language of the Troika is really very simple. You are a responsible and well-mannered finance minister if you sign on the dotted line of everything they give you. If you want to discuss the economic logic and the social impact of what they give you, suddenly you become recalcitrant, you become unbearable, and so on and so on. By the way,
Yeah.
the adults in the room was not spoken about me.
No, okay. But others have said this. You've actually pointed out.
But you know, the ones who said it never met me.
Well,
Yeah, people like, for instance, Martin Schulz and Guy Verhofstadt, people who've said really nasty things about me. I've never met them.
yeah.
The ones who met me don't really have anything of the sort to say.
But some of them who were in the room for these negotiations with you did have this complaint, and you've made reference to this yourself. They complained that you wanted to talk a lot about macroeconomics.
Yes, I'm guilty.
That's a very.
As a finance minister, I want to talk about finance.
But I kind of think that the Troika is going to talk about economics in a meeting.
Yeah, they
But no?
don't. They never, ever do. You've got to realize that the Eurogroup, where the finance ministers meet, is a very interesting. I mean, that, somebody should actually write a play about it. Something like 12 Angry Men. Actually, it's even worse than that, because at least in the movie,
He gets off
with
in the end, yeah.
Henrik Fonda, there is a discussion about law in the Eurogroup. It's all recantation. It's more or less like a religious sect, constantly recapitulating the mantra. Let me give you an example, right, of my of how impossible I was in demanding to talk about economics. There's something in economics, in macroeconomics and macrofinance called the primary surplus of a government. This is the surplus in the budget before you start calculating debt repayments. So the tax revenues of a country minus the government expenditure, ignoring debt repayments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a primary surplus. Now, when I got into the ministry, I inherited a target of a ridiculous target of 4.5% of national income. Now, no country has ever achieved 4.5% of national income, especially for 10, 15 years, which was the commitment of Greece, according to the Troika's machinations. No country has ever achieved that. To expect the broken economy of Greece to produce it for 10, 15 years, it's like expecting me to break the 100-meter sprint record next summer. It won't happen. You can beat me, you can shoot me, you can torture me. However hard I train, I am not going to break the world record at 100 meters. No way. Similarly with the Greek economy, it just couldn't happen. So, but what is terrible is that when you try to reach that target and you announce that this is your target, investment dries up. Because investors in a country like Greece think the government is committed to this target for the surplus, which means that they will keep ratcheting up tax rates. So why do I want to invest in a country which is dying financially and whose taxes next year are going to be higher than this year and where demand will be lower than this year? So no investment, and then the income shrinks further, the tax take comes down, the target is not reached, and then they have to increase, this doom loop. So I had to end this doom loop. So I'm in the Eurogroup meeting, and I'm trying to explain this, that, folks, look, you are pushing me to accept this 4.5% primary surplus. You are essentially asking me to lie to you, to make a promise which I know cannot be fulfilled, and I know it should not be fulfilled. This is not a good foundation for our relationship. I'm a rookie finance minister. I just walked in here. I would like to make a commitment to you that firstly it would be good for me, for my country. It would be good for you. You get more money back. And thirdly, one that we can actually reach, a target that we can actually hit. And Wolfgang Schäuble, from the other side of the room, says to me, okay, you don't like 4.5, what do you want it to be? I thought, okay, that's a basis for having a serious adult conversation. I said, Wolfgang, you know, the primary surplus in the budget of a nation, of an economy, is a number that is determined together with two other numbers. One is the trade surplus, and the other is the difference between savings and investment. So if you have a great gap between savings and investment, savings exceeds investment because investment is very low because of the crisis, and you have a more or less balanced trade account, that makes it very difficult to have a balanced budget. Mm-hmm. So I will be able to reach a higher surplus target, if you want me to have a higher surplus target, if we push investment up through a particular investment policy so as to close the gap between savings and investment and boost our export sector through restructuring banks so that the banks can provide credit to export-oriented companies. I come out of the Eurogroup and suddenly there were all these reports of how I offended my fellow finance ministers by insisting to talk about macroeconomics as if I was in a lecture theater lecturing at students. Go figure.
What did they think of that proposal, though?
Oh, this is what I call the Swedish national anthem routine. I would make these presentations, arguments. I would table very sophisticated and very moderate proposals about how to manage the debt. I would make the presentation and I would look at the blank stares, the blank faces of fellow finance ministers, and I would feel that whether I had made the presentation that I had made or sung the Swedish national anthem, it was exactly the same result.
How betrayed do you feel now by Syriza?
Not at all. Look, you see, William, let me preface my answer with something which I think is very important. I'm a leftist, which means that I carry with me the collective guilt, the sins of leftists from the last 100 years. We leftists have been very, very good at creating gulags in which we sent each other, at pointing fingers, moralistic fingers at one another, at calling each other traitors, at turning against each other, a bit like the Christians, right?
Yeah.
And I have determined and committed myself to not do this ever in my own political career, in my own personal life.
Right.
So I'm never going to say to Alexis Tsipras, you're a traitor. I'm not going to say to my former colleagues, my comrades, anything that can be construed as a denunciation. My father refused to denounce even people that he didn't believe in. So I'm not going to denounce my comrades and my friends. I've stated my very serious disagreement with what they did. I think they've betrayed themselves, because I think that what now my successor, Euclid Tsakalotos, is doing in the finance minister is soul destroying for him.
Yeah. He was your deputy throughout all of that, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah. I know Euclid. He's a dear friend and colleague from the University of Athens. I haven't spoken to him for a very long while, but I have no doubt that he's suffering, because of the things that he is signing up to.
Yes, I've heard you talking about him, and you've said that he agreed with everything you would say during these negotiations.
So I don't understand why he's signing up to all those things. But I'm not going to denounce anyone, and I'm not going to speak the language of denunciation.
Yeah. They betrayed themselves.
Oh, I have no doubt that they have. There is no way that they feel good about what they're doing, even if there is, human beings are fantastic at ex post rationalization. We can always find reasons for what we do after the event in order to justify what they've done. But deep down, our conscience keeps telling us things which make life very, very difficult when our deeds are in such conflict with our own beliefs.
So right up to the present
This
day.
was almost Christian, wasn't it?
You're getting messianic actually at this point, but right, you're carrying the sins of the world in your own body. My goodness, sort of an economic image of the crucifixion happening before our very eyes here. Bring us right up to date. You said, I think just to CNN just a couple of days ago, you used this phrase about the the European Union, that they proved yet again how good they are at being terrible, and that is where we are right now in your judgment in terms of Greece.
Not just Greece, the whole thing.
I mean, the relationship.
Look, ever since the global financial crisis hit in 2008, we have monthly meetings of the European Union leaders, the summits, the European Union Council meetings, and monthly meetings of the Eurogroup and ECOFIN. Every month we have an error compounding a previous error. It's a comedy of errors. Every time they've solved the crisis, they've come up with a fantastic solution to the crisis. And then the next month, they agree that the previous solution was bunk, so they come up with another fantastic solution. It is astonishing. I mean, history is going to remember the period between 2008 and 2017 in Europe as a magnificent demonstration of human frailty, of the capacity of politicians. It's like watching King Lear. The audience who's never seen King Lear before thinks, my God, how can smart people make so many mistakes one after the other? Or, Macbeth, one crime perpetrated in order to cover up a previous crime. This is what Europe has been. The crisis we've had in Europe could be solved very, very easily. Technically, it's extremely easy to solve. And Greece should not be a matter for discussion. It's like, imagine if in the United States, the great state of Delaware threatened the United States integrity, the integrity of the United States of America for 7 years. And it was constantly in the news. That Delaware this and Delaware that, and Delaware is going to blow up the United States. I submit to you that if that were the case in the United States, there would be something wrong with the United States, not with Delaware. So Greece is simply the brittlest part of the Eurozone, of the European Union. And the fact that it is constantly, it's a festering wound, is an indication, like the canary in the mine, that should remind Europeans that there's something profoundly wrong with the economic architecture of Europe, which the political class of Europe is failing to address, even though technically it will be quite straightforward to do.
Is the European project doomed at this point? I mean, you could predict the crash. Can you predict the collapse of the European Union project?
Well, again, allow me to preface my answer because I think it's also important. There is a profound difference between meteorology that you mentioned before and politics.
Yeah.
The weather doesn't give a damn about us. It will be whatever it will be. So we can indulge ourselves by trying to predict it. We can't change it unless it's climate change in the long run, but we can't change the weather in Belfast tomorrow morning, unfortunately.
Unless you've got one of those.
So
big
we can be
Chinese
scientific
air
about it.
balloons,
We can express. We can show our understanding of the weather pattern through predicting it well.
Yeah, forecasting.
But when it comes to the European Union, when it comes to the economy of Europe, when it comes to the politics of Europe, we are all participants. We are the creators of the phenomenon. Each one of us. We have a moral and political duty to take this responsibility seriously. We don't have the right to sit on our couch and make predictions. I mean, of course, we need to make predictions as well. But we have to take our fate in our own hands. This is what we're trying to do with DiEM, the Democracy Europe movement. And this was my preface for saying that if you ask me to give you a cold prediction of what's going to happen in the European Union, as you just did, I will say to you that it's not looking good. The European project has been, even a year ago, you would go to any major European city and present a plan to save Europe. Skepticism would take the form of whether your plan was any good. Today, wherever you go, in Paris, in Berlin, in Belfast, a different kind of skepticism comes up. Should we try to save the European Union? Huh?
Yes.
So that just goes to show how advanced a stage of disintegration the European project finds itself in. But my view is that even though no one can accuse me of being a lapdog of the Brussels bureaucracy or the European Union institutions, they don't like me very much, as you know, as you said. I'm still determined to call upon everyone to try to save it. Not because it's lovable, not because it works well, not because it's humane, not because it's liberal, but because the disintegration of the European Union, of this terrible European Union, is going to have serious human costs throughout Europe, including here.
Does Germany want Greece out?
There is no such thing as Germany. No, seriously. You know, we should never. I make a point.
Does Wolfgang Schäuble want Greece?
Wants Greece.
He wants Greece.
But remember, any sentence begins with the words "the Germans" is wrong.
Yes.
Because whatever you
It's all
add
about
after
people,
the Germans are like this, or they are not like this, or they want this, it's completely false because the Germans are divided amongst themselves.
Yeah.
There's so much variety of views and character and caliber amongst Germans as there is amongst the Irish, as there is amongst the Greeks.
But does the German finance minister want Greece out of the EU?
Absolutely.
And how would that help from his point of view?
Well, you see, my conversations with Wolfgang Schäuble were very insightful because here's a man who has a plan. I don't agree with his plan, but at least, you know, it's nice to have somebody that has a plan because everybody else has no plan. They are just completely all over the place. Schäuble understands that the Eurozone we have is not functional and is not sustainable, which is what I think too.
Yeah.
The difference between us is what needs to be done. His particular view, which is not mine, I have to stress that, is that the Eurozone needs to shrink. Some countries that don't belong there must leave. Greece is one of them, not the only one in his view.
Right.
I don't know where he stops. Is Italy in or not? I'm not sure.
Is Ireland in for him?
He doesn't care. Insignificant. Seriously. I'm being honest with you. Greece, he cares about because he knows that Greece is bankrupt.
Yeah.
And he has made promises to the Bundestag, the federal parliament, about getting their money back that they lent to, supposedly to Greece, but of course it was to Deutsche Bank and the other French and German banks. He's made promises that he knows he can't keep, and that is politically toxic for him. So he knows that the debt cannot be repaid, but he doesn't want to go to his parliamentarians and admit that unless he offers to them a permanent solution, which for him is Grexit. He's getting rid of Greece. Say, okay, well, look, it was a mistake. We brought them in, we shouldn't have brought them in. We gave them money, we shouldn't have given them money. At least now we are amputating this limb, and therefore the gangrene will stop there.
Right.
To use a horrible allegory. So that's his plan. And when I was negotiating with him, there were delicious moments and angst-creating and inducing moments too. I remember this occasion sometime in June of 2015 when I was saying to him, look, you're pushing me to sign this loan agreement and this new austerity package and so on. I want you to do me a favor. For 5-10 minutes, can we just pretend we're not finance ministers? Can I seek your advice? Because you've been in this business now for 40 years in politics, I mean, and I've been in it for 5 months. So I'd like, you're the elder statesman here. I'd like your advice. Don't tell me what to do. I want advice from you. There's a fundamental difference. And of course he understood the difference. And he said, yeah, okay. So I said, well, okay. And took the piece of paper and said, would you sign this if you were me? And he looked out of the window for a while.
Yeah.
It felt like a century to me. And he came back and he said, as a patriot, no. So I said to him, well, why are you making me sign it? He said, and then he went into a soliloquy about how bad it would be for my people to sign this piece of paper that he was forcing me to sign. So okay, all right, we agree. Now, why? And the explanation was very simple. The Eurozone is not sustainable, and his greatest fear was that the French economy is not sustainable, and he wanted control over the French national budget. So, for him, making us sign this piece of paper was a signal he was sending to Paris that they could expect no leeway from him. So we were collateral damage. So I said to him at some point, but Wolfgang, how do you feel about sacrificing a proud nation as collateral damage in your tussle against Paris? And to his credit, he said, not good. Not good. I want to help you. I want to give you huge help because your people don't deserve this. Get out of the Eurozone so that I can signal, that was the effective message, I can signal to Paris that the only way you can get lenience from Berlin is if you stop using the Deutschmark, the euro. Yeah? The tragedy was that he didn't have a mandate to do that. I said to him, Wolfgang, what define huge help? So we had a long discussion about it until I realized that whether I agreed with him or not, and I didn't agree with him, he did not have a mandate to discuss Brexit with me from his chancellor. This is a tragedy in Europe. Henry Kissinger made the point succinctly a long time ago. When I want to talk to Europe, I don't know whom to call.
That's it.
So even if I agreed with Schäuble, Merkel would disagree. Then Draghi would disagree. It's what Theresa May is going to have to face. She thinks she's going to negotiate with Europe. She has another thing coming. There's no such thing as Europe.
27 Europes.
Yeah. Not just 27 Europes. Because even within the country, in Germany, you agree with Merkel, Schäuble will find a way of undermining your agreement with Merkel because he doesn't like Merkel very much at all.
And actually, you think Schäuble is one of the good guys in all of this because at least you get an
call
honest.
him good.
Get an honest answer out of him. He tells you what he's actually thinking.
But look, if I say to you, I'm going to murder you and do it, I'm honest. It doesn't make me good, does it? But no, I'm not trying to say that anything bad about Wolfgang because I actually liked Wolfgang.
Yeah.
And I appreciated the candor in our conversation.
Do you want to revise your earlier answer about whether you were impossible in these negotiations?
I wasn't at all impossible.
No, that's perfectly
I just gave you an example of the kind of negotiation I had with Wolfgang to highlight the fact that I wasn't at all impossible. He himself said I wouldn't sign this piece of paper while trying to make me sign it. Who was being impossible? We were in an impossible situation. We were in a genuine tragedy. You know what a genuine tragedy is?
Yes.
When good people try to do good things, but the result is a catastrophe.
And an inevitable one.
That's Shakespeare, isn't it?
Yes, the inevitability of it. But all of that makes sense. That critique of the power dynamics of the European Union and the different parts of it. All of that makes sense. What doesn't make sense to a lot of people on the left is why you want to parry with this. Why continue with this? You've been a scathing critic of the democratic deficit and of the financial craziness of Europe. Why put up with it? Get out. You'd be better off having a lot of nation states like your own proud nation doing their own thing with their own currencies, making their own decisions. Why do you put up with it? Why do you want to continue with it?
Allow me to answer in 3 different ways. The first one is...
French, German and Greek.
No, it's not a joke. A Frenchman, a Greek and a German walk into a pub. No, it's not like that. 3, seeing the same...
Who ended up paying for the round? That's what we want to know. But yeah, all right.
Seeing the same question from 3 different angles. Right. The first one, I'm addressing now left-wingers that asked me that question. And I will remind them of what happened in the 1930s. I would say to them, remember after 1929, the left was ecstatic that capitalism was collapsing. And it was a good thing that capitalism was collapsing because the good society, socialism, would emerge from its ashes. It didn't. Nazism emerged from its ashes. So the collapse of the European Union is not necessarily going to be the collapse of neoliberalism and the rise of a new progressive set of European nation states. The only people who will benefit from the collapse of the European Union are Marie Le Pen in France, the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, Golden Dawn in Greece, UKIP in Britain. It's not us leftists that are going to... We're going to end up in the concentration camp again. And our countries are going to end up very miserable in a deflationary state like in the postmodern 1930s. That's the first angle from which to look at the question. The second one has to do with the difference between where you are and where you're going, the static versus the dynamic dimension of things. Now, in the 1970s, as a young man, I campaigned against Greece's entry into the European Union. And I think I was right. In the 1990s, as an economist, I campaigned against Greece's entry into the Eurozone. And I think I was right. But it's quite one thing to say I shouldn't get in. And it's quite another to say I should get out.
Yes.
Because when you get out, you don't necessarily go back to where you would have been had you not entered.
Yeah, yeah.
The path that led you from having your own currency to having the euro no longer exists once you've traversed
Once you've gone
it.
in, of course. That's why broken marriages survive, for the children.
Well, no, but on the other hand, I am not saying that divorce is the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that I'm not going to go for it as my first option. So as a finance minister of Greece, my view was not that, if we get out of the euro, it will be a complete Armageddon. No. What I said was, there are three possible outcomes here. One is a renegotiated treaty with the Eurozone so that we can stay sustainably within the Eurozone. That was my first preference. I still believe that even though we shouldn't have got into the euro, given that we're in, the best outcome, the first best, would be a renegotiated program for Greece within the Eurozone.
Yeah.
Failing that, the worst thing that could happen was what has happened, which is an extend and pretend of the crisis, extending the crisis into the future, pretending to solve it by means of more loans, continuing the same thing. That was the worst possible outcome. In between would be Grexit. So the divorce is better than a very unhappy marriage. So I'm nuanced on this. Now, the third angle from which I would like to see it is, and again I'm addressing left-wing colleagues who are what we call Lexiteers.
Yeah, the left exit.
The left exit supporters. I say to them, when they say, the European Union is a neoliberal concoction, it's illiberal, it is
a boss's club.
A boss's club, a cartel. Of course it is. But remember, when the left rose in the 18th and 19th centuries as a radical challenge to the state, to the capitalist state that was emerging, to the bourgeois state, as Marx would put it. Well, our narrative was not about dismantling the state. The anarchists believed that, but the left didn't. The left believed in what I call in and against, remaining within the institutions of the bourgeois state and trying to go against the way it functioned, against the interests of people, and turn the functioning of the state in favor of the masses. Now, as a patriot, it was always my duty to oppose my government when it was wrong.
Yeah.
And as a Europeanist, it is my duty to oppose the European Union from within and try to confront its establishment like the left always has done from within. So I don't think there is any contradiction in saying the European Union sucks, let's stay in and confront its establishment.
Yeah, I hear this argument sometimes from gay Catholic priests who want to stay in the priesthood and try to change the Catholic Church, and then sometimes they realize it'll take 1,000 years before they might be acceptable as openly gay Catholic priests. How long do you give it before you give up?
I don't need to give up because the European Union is going to give up on itself.
It's doomed. It's doomed.
The way, look, it's not what I used to say to my fellow ministers and maybe annoyed them no end. I used to say to them that, look, in our government, yes, we are a radical left government, but we are staunch Democrats and Europeanists. You can have good partners in us if you agree to compromise with us in order to kickstart Greece and make our social economy viable. It would be good for Europe if the European Union shows that it can do business with a party like ours. We're Europeanists, but we're not accepting austerity, and we're not accepting the extending and pretending. They crushed us. What's the result? The result is that the crushing of Greek democracy has wounded the self-image of Europe everywhere in Europe, and therefore it has given a major boost to the right-wing populists, which are now destroying Europe.
I'm going to come to the audience right after this, but one final question before we turn to the audience. We've talked about Grexit, Legxit, the left exit, Brexit. Donald Trump thinks he's a kind of Amerixit. He thinks he is kind of the embodiment of the same unleashing of a sense of freedom that he interprets Brexit to be. Do you think Donald Trump and Brexit are two parts of the same narrative?
Yes, I call it the nationalist international, and it's not just them.
No.
There is Le Pen in France, There is a very nasty party that is going to do very well in the Dutch election in the next few days. The Austrian presidency was almost won by one of them.
Yeah.
You have the illiberal Democrats, as they call themselves, in Hungary and in Poland. There is an international movement, a Trumpist, Le Penist international movement. But we must just take a step back from this phenomenon and look at it and place it in its historical context. 2008 was our generation's 1929. 1929, just like 2008, began with the Wall Street collapse. Very, very soon after that, weeks after that, the international financial and monetary system started fragmenting. It was the gold standard back then. It's the euro now, international finance now. The losses of the bankers and of the financialization were immediately transferred onto the shoulders of the weakest of citizens in 1930. Remember the liquidate slogan of the Hoover administration in the United States at the time. And what was the result? The result was the political center imploded and all sorts of political monsters arose in its place. We've seen this in the 1930s. We're seeing it again. Whether it's Donald Trump or Le Pen, if it wasn't Donald Trump, it would have been somebody else. I don't believe that UKIP would have been so successful in promoting Brexit if it wasn't for the inane handling of Europe's inevitable crisis by the establishment. This is what happens when the political class is trying to pretend that the crisis it caused didn't happen.
Right.
By pushing the costs of the crisis that it caused onto the shoulders of the weakest citizens.
So Brexit was a European own goal.
A European own goal and an establishment own goal. Most of the people in north of England, for instance, who voted for Brexit, they were not voting for the European Union. They and in exactly the same way that people in Mississippi and in Wisconsin were voting for Trump, they were not actually liking Trump necessarily. They were asking themselves a very simple question. We've been discarded by the establishment for years. We've been treated like non-existent people. Their focus groups tell them, the establishment politicians, that we don't count because we don't vote, because we're not educated enough, because we're not the median voter that determines who gets elected. We are going to give them a lesson. We're going to, for whoever upsets them the most. Who upsets the establishment the most? Trump. We'll vote for Trump. What upsets the establishment in London and in Brussels and in Frankfurt and in Washington D.C. the most? Voting for Brexit or for Remain? Brexit. We vote for Brexit. And I think this is what we're seeing. So it's the so-called liberal establishment, which was never liberal, that has created the circumstances of its own undoing.
Let's thank Yanis Varoufakis for a fascinating conversation, first of all. We get some lights up. There you are. I was actually wondering about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to come to the question I was wondering about. We had glasses but no water. And I thought this could be a very interesting economics metaphor, couldn't it?
That's
glasses
right.
without water.
We have the institutions but not the rationality.
There you are. So I'll tell you what we've done. We've asked a few people, we've selected a few questions. That's not to limit us, it's just to structure the conversation a bit. Two of those people on my list, you're very welcome, have some water, are Rosa and I think Yanis, and I think they're in the other room. If you are in the other room, come back in here, guys, would you? I think you've gone to the wrong room. We're going to come to you in a minute. And we'll get the mics moving around, and I'm going to go to the first question. It is Michael Pierce. Where are you, Michael? There you are. Take it away, sir.
So we're talking about democracy in Europe. What about democracy in Ireland? What do you think the consequences of pulling the north of Ireland out of the EU, despite the express will of the people here, because of a vote in Britain, will be?
Well, don't forget Scotland.
Yes.
The Scottish are rather...
Did you all hear that
peeved.
question, first of all? The consequences of pulling Northern Ireland out of the EU?
Well, again, I'm going to preface my answer to your question and then answer it. The Democracy in Europe movement is not a think tank about Europe. It is about democracy in every community across Europe. Here in Belfast, in Derry, in Dublin, in Birmingham, in Lyon, in Patra, in Crete. About, democracy everywhere. You see, those of us who put DiEM together at some point had this idea. Maybe it's wrong, but this is our idea. That democracy is not a luxury to be afforded to rich nations or to nations that are powerful. Democracy is essential for handling the affairs of every community, every region, every country in a way that is efficient and produces good results for decent common people. So the question is, how can Northern Ireland and the people of Northern Ireland acquire more control over their lives? That is the main question. People say to me, well, who should speak for Northern Ireland? The answer is the people of Northern Ireland. Similarly, I would answer in the same way about Catalonia in Spain, about Sicily, about Cyprus. The question of how to handle Brexit in the context of Ireland must be embedded more broadly on how to handle Brexit more generally. Because, as I said, Scotland is an important part. There are the whole of London. Think of the vast majority in London who voted against Brexit. Now, you may say that, well, the majority of people in Britain voted for Brexit, so Brexit must be respected. Okay, fine. But what does this mean in practice? Our view as DiEM, and now I'm coming to your question, is that we need, like in every democracy, to find an accommodation between contradictory principles. So on the one hand, there is the principle of respecting the majority view. So Brexit won, and it has to go ahead. We can't do to the people of the United Kingdom that which Brussels did to the people of the Republic of Ireland after the Lisbon Treaty. They voted against the Lisbon Treaty and they were told to vote again until they get it right. So we have to respect the majority view of this. But at the same time, we have to respect common sense. And even the Brexit argument. What is the strongest argument in favor of Brexit? Allow me to answer that rhetorical question. Philosophically and politically, the strongest argument is we want sovereignty to return to the British Parliament. Okay, I respect that. Well, let's return it to the British Parliament. This Parliament, the members of Parliament today, were not elected with a mandate to discuss Brexit. Because when they were elected, Brexit was not on the horizon, really. The previous election was not fought on Brexit. So let's give the next Parliament the mandate to discuss what kind of Brexit the people of the United Kingdom want. And let's, in the meantime, trigger Article 50, but file for an interim period of 5, 6, 7 years of a European Economic Area Norway-style agreement that would leave almost everything else, the customs union, the single market, freedom of movement intact, until the next Parliament decides what it wants to do, with a period of 4 or 5 years ahead of it to have the proper discussion that it needs to do. If that happened, then the people of Northern Ireland would also get an opportunity to debate amongst yourselves what you want to do given different scenario in London.
Is that consistent with Article 50, though?
Absolutely.
We have a 2-year period of negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be no negotiations. Believe me, there will be no negotiations. It will be a sham. You already see that Brussels now wants to have a negotiation first about the divorce conditions, how much money London will have to pay Brussels for the right to leave the EU, before having negotiations on trade, on everything else. 2 years is not enough. It won't happen. It's going to be a sham. So, if you trigger Article 50 and immediately Theresa May were to file for an interim agreement based on the Norway model, what would happen is for 2 years,
It's not going to happen.
you would stay
She's
where
already
you
ruled it
are,
out. She's
and
already
in
ruled it out.
2019 you would go
Yeah.
from EU membership to EEA
It's
membership.
fantasy politics. She's already ruled it out.
Yeah, I know. But listen, politics is what happens when people get together and pressurize one another.
She can't go back on her position now, Yanis.
Well, she would if the people of Britain forced her to.
Within 4 weeks,
Politicians are
within
politicians.
4 weeks,
you know.
we're triggering Brexit. 2 years later, according to the Act, we have the end of the negotiation.
But you know what?
Deal on the table, done. Exit.
I think that Theresa May is going to very much regret her position on this. I think that it's very possible that within a year she will change her mind on this as a result of her inability to negotiate with Brussels anything that is remotely close to the interests of the British Isles.
Can I just say I'm not supposed to be doing this conversation. I'm supposed to be talking to the audience. Let's go to Sai Lee for a follow-up question. Where are you, Sai? Over here, right over here. I'm going to try not to get involved in the conversation around these issues. Go, Sai.
Okay, this is a follow-on question, essentially. Assuming that we are facing Brexit and the implications for the economy and for the Good Friday Agreement, is there some kind of scope for a secondary status for Northern Ireland within Europe, some kind of associate membership or something like that, do you think?
Absolutely not. If Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom, the answer is no. It's really very straightforward.
No special status?
No. No special status within a nation, a country, which is not a member of the European Union and which does not want a Norway-style agreement with.
Why not? Why not that?
Because there's no possible mechanism by which to establish
Indeed,
that.
it hasn't been done before. It would be unique. You'd have to create it. But why can't you create something new?
Well, getting 27 countries to agree to a new treaty just for Northern Ireland is less likely than creating world peace, socialism, and everyone being tall, blonde, and Swedish at the same time.
You haven't really come to terms with our sense of self-esteem in this country, have you? Why can't the whole world change to accommodate us?
Northern Ireland? Well, I would support this, but on the other hand, I think that this Brexit has been a shock to many of us because of the incongruities that it creates, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to rethink the situation in Ireland. I think that we should, I said this in your program today, I think this is a great opportunity to separate two issues that I think should be separate. One is identity, and the other is economic and social policy. I perfectly respect the need of unionists to be part of Britain in this part of the world, of the nationalists to be part of unified Ireland, of being part of a community of similarly minded political beings. But I think that it should be possible for Northern Ireland to allow full respect for identity politics while creating a unified Irish jurisdiction that is part of the European Union. Now, how this is going to happen and what the relationship between Northern Ireland should be with Britain on the one hand and the Republic on the other, this is where we need to innovate.
Gosh.
I do not believe we can innovate by saying that a province of the United Kingdom is going to have a special relationship with the European Union just because this is what it wants. I don't believe that this is feasible, but what would be feasible is an innovation where Ireland as a whole has a relationship with the European Union and a complicated marriage both with London and with Dublin.
Sharing the kids sort of thing, to continue our model. Well, I don't think that will be acceptable to unionists, of course, because I think you're suggesting something like a federalised relationship between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which would be very difficult politically for unionists to argue for.
Well, let's call it something else. Let's not call it federalized. You talked about innovation.
Tony
Let's
Blair
innovate.
used to think that we could do politics here by just calling it something else.
But that
ultimately,
has worked.
the meaning of the words keep haunting us.
Yes, I know, but the Good Friday Agreement is a very good example of how you can innovate yourself out of sectarianism.
You actually think that is a more realistic prospect than what the SDLP, for example, is calling for, this special status, where Northern Ireland is treated as a special case within the current situation of the European Union. You think that's more realistic?
Yes, absolutely, because, look, let's face it, that cannot happen for Northern Ireland and not for Scotland. Scotland has had a greater majority for staying in the EU than Northern Ireland did.
Sure.
The Scots are adamant that they want to be part of Europe. And therefore, I do not believe that it is feasible. And then also you have the problem with Catalonia, of the relationship between Madrid and all these debates. There has to be, let's not call it a unified Ireland, let's call it an Irish jurisdiction.
It would be joint sovereignty over Northern Ireland.
Joint sovereignty.
That's what you'd be talking about.
Yeah. It's difficult, but
You have no idea how difficult that would be.
Well, I do, because I come from a part of the world that understands sectarianism and understands civil war and understands ancient hatreds. Remember, we Greeks are very good at that. You don't have the monopoly of civil war. There is an island called Cyprus, which has a green line running through it, which has two communities, two religions, ancient hatreds. And I do believe that we have a great opportunity, come to think of it. Take these two islands, Ireland and Cyprus. They are diametrically opposed geographically, but very similar in terms of the political difficulty that they pose for Europe. Now, once upon a time, the Germans and the Italians and the French and the Luxembourgians and the Belgians looked at us, the Irish and the Cypriots, thinking, oh, look at these crazies fighting with one another. This sectarianism, I mean, how primitive are these peoples? But now, the divisions of Cyprus and the divisions of Ireland are infecting Europe. We now have demands for new borders. You try to go from Austria to Germany to drive. There are new borders now, and long queues of cars because of the collapse, the disintegration of the European Union. So now I think it's a great opportunity for people like the Irish and the Greeks and the Turks and the Cypriots and so on to find solutions for our own sectarianism, for our own divisions, and teach the Central Europeans, how to suck eggs.
Do you want to respond to that? Okay. Are you happy, Michael? Michael, do you want to respond to anything you're hearing? I should have come back to both of you.
Yeah, just in terms of the problems, I think there's a number of potential problems from the North of Ireland being removed from the EU. One, of course, is the border and the hardening of the border and how that undermines the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. And I think it's a bit rich that 20 years ago, some of the people who spent a lot of time lecturing us here about the principle of consent are now telling us that we've no consent.
You're completely right. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself.
Thank you very much, Michael. Mirav, where are you? Mirav Amir. In this room somewhere? Are you here, Mirav? No? I've got a name, but no questions here. I would have put the question myself. We'll go to the next question, which is Yanis Balak. Where are you, Yanis? Right there. You were in the other room, were you? Did you sneak back in? Welcome back.
I was already here.
Oh, you were already here. Yeah. Over to you, sir.
What is your opinion on the plans of the British government to cut the corporation tax rate to 70% by 2020 and the concerns of some of the EU countries that UK sees its future business model as being the tax haven of Europe?
Well, it's an arms race, isn't it? It's a race to the bottom. Now, I don't see why corporations should pay less tax than citizens. I'm not in favor of high tax rates. I actually tried to reduce corporation tax in Greece and to reduce personal tax and VAT in Greece when I was a finance minister. So I'm a bit of a weird lefty. But I don't think that corporations can on the one hand demand that they have human rights, as they do in the United States now, while they don't pay the tax rates that humans pay. And this idea of a race to the bottom, where everybody's trying to undermine everyone else within our European continent, what is the logical conclusion of that? Tiny corporation taxes being paid, and therefore the tax burden being shifted to the weakest of taxpayers. I don't think that works. The only reason why the Republic is getting away with it is because no one else is doing it. It's a bit like Switzerland. People say to me, look at Switzerland, it's an amazing economy, isn't it? Yeah, it's only an amazing economy because there's only one Switzerland. If everybody tried to be Switzerland, in other words, to be the bankers of the world, it wouldn't work. The Irish are succeeding in attracting, not the Irish, the Republic is succeeding to attract great American multinationals like Facebook and Google and Apple and all that, and the pharmaceutical companies, because they're the only ones who are effectively letting them get away with murder, paying a tiny tax rate.
Yeah.
If Greece did it, and Italy did it, and Germany did it, and Britain did it, and everybody did it, then why would they go to Ireland? They could go anywhere in Europe.
Yeah.
So Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, has a very, very simple idea. Only do that which can be universalized logically. So this is a rational argument against, for instance, lying.
Yes.
Because if everybody lied, then language would fail to be useful as a means by which to communicate. So if I knew you would lie, even if I asked you what is the time, and I knew you would lie in your answer, then we might as well lose our linguistic skills. So generalized lying doesn't work. Generalized diminution of corporate tax rates doesn't work. So we shouldn't practice it.
Jesus got there first. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Well, every religion
but these are not the principles that govern the world today, are they? The world's not Kantian.
But you know, that's maybe the reason why we are in the state we are in. Everybody's trying to undermine everybody else. It's everybody tries to free ride on everyone else, and the result is that we all suffer.
Yanis, do you want to come back on that? Any thoughts? Happy enough with that? Marks out of 10, what do you reckon? 4, maybe 5. Got it. Yeah. Thank you. Joan, where are you? Joan Martin has a question for us, I hope. Joan, are you here? Well, this is working out brilliantly, isn't it? Yeah. These pre-scripted questions. Anybody in the room want to respond to what you've heard all evening and pick up on any point that has been made or anything that hasn't been said yet? Someone at the back, gentleman here. Was there someone down here? Go for it. Let's take a couple of you.
Hello.
Give us your name first of all, just your first name.
And stand up so I can see you.
Yeah, stand up. Go on, stand up, that man.
I'm Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
You spoke very well about the idea of, notice it there as well, let's shake Europe gently, compassionately, but firmly. And this idea that you can reform Europe from inside. But, I mean, just listening to your story there of how your negotiations went, does it not come to a point where you can be very moralistic and say, you know, I'm not going to sign off on this because it's immoral and I don't necessarily believe in it, but then once you resign, someone else is always going to be there to implement the very thing that you were in a disagreement about?
Yeah, fat lot of use that was. He kept his own hands clean, but somebody else had to sign off on it. And
no,
it happened
somebody
anyway.
else didn't have to sign on.
It happened anyway.
They signed on. There's a fundamental difference between having to sign on and signing on. We didn't have to sign on. We could have said no and stick to it. It's called, disobedience.
When you refused to do
I
it,
was
when you refused to do
idea.
it, you knew somebody else would walk in and do it, and you probably knew who it would be too.
No, actually, I didn't. You
didn't think they were
I
going
was
to do
actually hoping that my colleagues after me would not do it. I was wrong.
Yeah.
I've been wrong many times in my life. This was one of them. But look, allow me to say this. Okay, we are in this European Union. Okay, for better or for worse. We could get out. We could say, well, this is impossible, it's unreformable, it's mind-boggling. Let's get out. What happens if we get out, folks? What happens if everybody in Europe does that which Britain did? Let's say that Italy gets out. Let's say that Germany gets out. I'll tell you what's going to happen. A complete catastrophe for everyone, including you folks. What's going to happen is there's going to be a new fault line between Germany and France, down the River Rhine and across the Alps. An economic fault line. Because there's going to be a new Deutschmark zone that will engulf not just Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Baltics. They will have the same currency because they're all very much integrated within German industry.
They'll be just chasing the Deutschland, whatever it is.
Deutschmark. That new currency is going to go through the roof because it's a massive surplus economy.
Yeah.
It's going to go through the roof. Do you know what this means? It means that the millions of German Poles who now work on a very, very low wage, they will be transformed from working poor to unemployed poor. Now, in the rest of Europe, in the Latin part of Europe, France, Italy, the parts which don't belong to this German Deutschmark area, they are going to have a combination of high inflation and high unemployment because their currencies are going to devalue, so prices are going to go up very fast. Combination of stagflation, 1970 style. Now that Europe is a cesspool of misanthropy. That Europe will be the Europe which is going to breed neo-fascists, nationalists, and just horrible politics. It will not be a place worth living in. Do you think that Ireland and Britain are going to escape from this simply by voting to get out of the EU? Even if you get out of the EU, like the Brits did, even if the Republic, gets out, like London did, the shock waves of economic deflation and stagflation from the continent of Europe are going to hit these islands very, very hard. So let's be very careful. Let's be very careful what we wish for. If we don't like Brussels and so on, simply upping stamps and leaving is not going to lead to good developments, even for those who have left. Yeah? So consider the alternative. The alternative is what I was trying to do. I was telling George Osborne, for instance, at some point, the Chancellor at the time when I was in government.
That's what you
we were in ECOFIN together.
With a leather jacket on.
With a leather jacket.
Yeah.
Actually, I was telling him in Brussels when we would meet that we had a great opportunity, even though we came from different parts of the political spectrum, in ECOFIN to bind forces and to veto everything that was wrong in terms of policy proposals coming from the center of Brussels. We don't like it, we veto it. We had the right to veto it. If we did that, then other countries would join in, and some rationality would be returned. This is what I refer to governmental disobedience. Staying in, not saying I'm leaving. Staying in and saying, you know what, I'm not signing anything until I see some reason coming from you folks in Brussels. Our countries, through their ministers and representatives in the Council, in ECOFIN, in the Eurogroup, we're going to veto everything. Let's please have a discussion about returning on the path of reason. Now, that is a lot better than saying, I'm going to pick up my stuff and leave. Leaving is not going to shield you from the postmodern 1930s that the disintegration of this terrible European Union is going to bring.
Who's got the mic? Incidentally, we haven't had a female voice yet. I'm very conscious of that.
Gender balance, please.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing any. Oh, we've got a woman at the very back up there. If there's another female voice, let's take two female voices in the room. I hate to say female voices, but you know what I mean. Let's get a gender balance into the conversation. Would you mind if we come back to you, sir? And we'll take this woman at the back. Thank you.
Thank you for the female voice. I want to go back to Greece and some of the stuff that you were talking about. You spoke to us very clearly about why what you tried to argue for didn't work, because they wanted to hold on to their their political capital. But could you go a bit further back and tell us why did it all start so badly with Greece? So why was the first agreement so bad?
How many hours do you have?
As many as you want.
We're not going anywhere, are we? We're here all evening.
Well, let me say that firstly, it was a mistake to get into the Eurozone. Had we not entered the Eurozone, you would not be asking me this question. There would be no Greek crisis. If we had not entered the Eurozone, not that Greece could be an efficient, corruption-free, all singing, all dancing economy, no. We would be like Bulgaria. Yeah? Do you talk about Bulgaria? No. What would be happening from 1998 to 2008 if we had not entered the Eurozone? We would be having a tepid kind of growth of 1.5%, 2% at the most every year, instead of the 5% that we had, which was debt-fueled, like the republics. And then in 2008, we would have had a mild crisis. The Greek currency would depreciate. A year later, we'd be growing again with our petty corruption, with our inefficiencies, the fun in the sun, and all that makes Greece what it is. And it would not be an issue. It would be an issue for the Greeks. We would be having conversations amongst ourselves as to how to make our economy more productive, our society richer, and so on and so forth. Yeah? So the mistake was to enter into the Eurozone. The mistake of the Europeans was to create the Eurozone. It was a major error because nobody, in the end, benefited long-term from it. It was pointless and a mistake.
Driven by politics rather than economics.
It was driven by interests, by vested interests, very powerful vested interests that created the politics. So, for instance, the ruling class in Greece really wanted the euro because they had yachts and they had assets, they had beautiful villas in the northern suburbs of Athens, and they hated the drachma because every time there was a devaluation, the dollar value of their assets was falling. So they wanted their assets to be denominated in the hard currency. Similarly, the working class and trades unions had enough of the Greek currency because every time they had a strike to get a 5%, 6% pay rise, a week later there would be devaluation. Imported goods would go up in price. They would lose all the gains from that they had won so hard through the strike.
Yeah.
So there were vested interests, both from labor and from capital, that wanted something that was a mistake for everyone. And then something really horrible happened. When you bind together disparate economies like Germany's and Greece's, effectively you are asking for a massive flow of money from the rich country to the poor country, from the surplus country to the deficit country. The reason for that, allow me to speak macroeconomics again, but in a simple way, I hope an understandable way. The reason is very simple. With every Mercedes-Benz or Volkswagen that goes from Germany to Greece, a sum of money goes from Greece to Germany. Yeah? Now, this creates, as long as these trade flows are imbalanced, it creates a lake of money in Frankfurt, in the banking system of Germany. And it creates a dearth of money in the deficit country like Greece. So money is scarce in Greece. Real interest rates rise, the price of money, because it's scarce, goes up. In Germany, the real interest rate collapses because there is an oversupply of money, the lake that I spoke about. So if you're a German banker, the last thing you want, your worst nightmare is to have a lot of money sitting there not being lent to anyone. Suddenly the Greeks look like the ideal people to lend to because they are prepared to pay higher interest rates for your money. And guess what? Greeks have a much lower level of private debt than Central Europeans do. Because Greeks, I grew up in a Greece that being in debt was a sin. Most Greeks own their own homes, they don't have mortgages. My parents thought that credit cards were the instruments of the devil. Similarly, even today, if you look at the private debt in Greece, it's very, very low. It's amongst the lowest. Public debt is high. Private debt is very low. Yeah? Still to this day. So Greeks were the ideal customers for Deutsche Bank because they were prepared to pay high interest rates and they had property to use as collateral. So all this money came to Greece. Now, by coming to Greece, it bid up asset prices, house prices, it gave Greeks an impression that they had more money than they really did. So they could get another loan to buy another Volkswagen And this thing carried on like this. Yeah. So the trade surpluses of Germany were Greece's debt, private and public debt. Now, when Deutsche Bank went bust, which it did in 2008, 2009, as a result of the global financial crisis, suddenly the German banks stopped refinancing all the debts that they had created in Ireland, in Spain, in Greece, in Portugal, and so on, because they were bust. When as a banker, you're bust. You don't lend any more money. So suddenly, all these bubbles that were created in Greece burst, and the Greek state could no longer support its, roll over its debt. The Greek banks could not roll over their debt, and the whole thing went pear-shaped. And what did Europe do? In order to bail out Deutsche Bank, they gave a wad of money to the Greek government to give it to the Deutsche Bank, and they called this solidarity with Greece. There was no bailout of Greece. It was a bailout of Deutsche Bank, Société Générale, and the French and German banks. Yeah. And the crime against logic that was perpetrated was that the conditions for giving these loans to the Greek state in order to give it to Deutsche Bank were that they would shrink national income in Greece by 25%. This is austerity. So it's like, I'm bankrupt. I make £100 a week, right? Or let's say £500 a week. It's not enough for me to service my debt. And you give me, I'm bankrupt. I cannot service my debt. You give me another loan on condition that I shrink my income from £500 a week to £300 a week. Now,
yeah,
it's crazy.
That all sounds suspiciously coherent.
Yes.
Yeah. I never trust economists who make sense. Thank you very much.
Can we have one question from the studio?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Yes, of course we can. I actually have a name from the studio.
It's question 10.
It's question 10. Oh, well, that's great.
Rosa.
There you go. Rosa, where are you? Rosa Caleri.
Hi, Rosa.
Hi, Rosa.
Hi. I think it was last year you were interviewing Channel 4. Oh, sorry. And you did say that if the UK will leave the European Union, it would be catastrophic for the European Union. Do you still believe that this is the case?
Absolutely.
And if so, why? Would you not think that the European Union actually, based on the current political states that we see around the world, could actually become more united? And then there is another thing that actually has just, I think a couple of weeks ago, which is again interesting when we think about the European Union and the state and this is going. Some of the wealthy states sort of say that it's a 27-country European Union, and not all will be prosperous the same way, and not all will have the same objective. So meaning that those that cannot really prosperous the same maybe should be left behind and try to make their way up. How do you see this?
Well, on the first question, one would have hoped, wouldn't one, that Brexit would be a wake-up call for the rest of the European Union, and they would get together and say, okay, guys, what have we done wrong? Let's face up to it. Instead, our great and good leaders, after Brexit, met in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, for the purpose of discussing how to solidify, to do what you said, to bring Europe closer together in response to Brexit. So they took a trip down the Danube on a riverboat, and they discussed creating a European army. That's it. And then they met again, Merkel, Renzi, and Hollande, a week later, on an Italian aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, which is very interesting because I didn't know Italy had an aircraft carrier. I don't know why it needs it. And that's where they also decided that France would lead the war against terrorism, and Italy would be excused as an additional amount of deficit in its budget. In other words, they are demonstrating a unique capacity to miss every opportunity they have in order to get closer together and actually face up to the architectural problems of the European Union. I don't see what you say. What I see is that we have Italy at the moment being completely unsustainable within the Eurozone. And we have a single party in Italy at the moment. Only one party, the Democratic Party, is in favor of keeping Italy in the Eurozone. Every other party is against it. In France today, the leading candidate, Le Pen, is advocating a policy of getting France not only out of the euro, but out of the EU. And the rest of the political class is in disarray. We have Germany, where Britain was 10 years ago. We are not, I travel to Germany a lot, and what I see is a very worrying trend of a coalescence between the banking community, the elites of Germany that are giving up on the European Union, and of the working poor who are beginning to hate the European Union in the same way that people in Doncaster and Leeds hate the European Union. So when you have these two converging, I can see Germany becoming UKIP territory within the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So I don't see what you're saying. I want to see what you're saying. And Diem is doing exactly that. On the second part of your question, it's not a question of different degrees of prosperity. Take the United States of America. Missouri and California are like chalk and cheese. Very, very different in terms of well-being. You know, Missouri is very poor compared to California, compared to Washington State, compared to New York State. Yeah? But the disparities are not diverging. They're not getting worse. You don't have a situation where you've got one part of the country, one state within the federation, that is the United States of America, condemned to permanent debt deflationary doom loops, and other parts increasing their surpluses vis-à-vis those parts. These are the centrifugal forces that are pulling Europe apart. And my great concern is that there's never a discussion about this in Europe.
Yeah.
You know, I went to all these meetings of finance ministers. Not once did we have this conversation. Not once. Not once. This is the astonishing thing. You see, my last book I wrote, because I started writing in 2012, because there was a simple question I wanted to answer for myself. In the United States, there were a series of very large-scale financial and economic crises since the beginning of the 19th century. Every time the Americans had a crisis, they got out of it more united, with better institutions, greater consolidation.
Yeah.
1929 is an example. It gave rise to the New Deal, to the institutions of the New Deal that they still have. They still rely. Yeah. The 2008 crisis was to a very large extent ameliorated by the institutions that Roosevelt had created. Yeah? Like the FDIC, for instance. Yeah. In the 1960s, there was a crisis with the civil liberties, civil rights movement and so on. The Great Society of LBJ solidified the country. Even after 2008, they had various, very imperfect, but nevertheless interventions in the institutions of Washington, D.C. and many different states.
Things like TARP.
That that created solidity. In Europe, the first major hurdle we faced, the first major crisis, and now all these centrifugal forces are tearing us apart, and they are not doing what the Americans do. The Americans are very pragmatic people. I'm not, you know, I'm a leftist. I spent my youth demonstrating against the American embassy in Athens, so, you know, I'm not here to promote the United States, but let's be fair. When they have a crisis, they get around the table and they ask themselves a very simple question. What should we do to end this crisis? And then they come up with answers that some of them are better than others, but actually there are answers to this question.
Yeah,
what do we do in Europe? We get together when there is a crisis and we ask a very different question. We start from the realization that the rules do not work. And the question that we pose to ourselves is, okay, the rules don't work, how can we pretend that they work? Not the same question.
I'm being told to bring this evening to an end, and I feel rising up within me that kind of like libertarian resistance to these hand gestures that you see them over there. These hand gestures, they're going like that. They're going all that.
Now they are pretending that they.
Do you stand with me when I say to them, "No, we are not finished.
We shall
continue to talk." Because I have promised other people a chance to ask a question. And in Irish terms, we are sucking diesel at this point. So we might as well continue just for a couple more minutes. Yeah. Were you one of the people giving me that hand gesture a minute ago? See, now you're cooperating, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens when you resist. The establishment then comes around and it revises its approach to you. And now we're negotiating. We have a few more minutes now, do we?
If we had a few more minutes, we have Ivanka on the top left.
Right, there is a possible world in which we can accommodate a couple more questions.
Who submitted a question, and she's also
Yes.
a female voice.
Ivanka is there. Hello, Ivanka. No relation? No? It's not that Ivanka. It's a different Ivanka. This one is Ivanka Antova. Welcome.
Yeah, how dare you?
Hi.
We're not all the same. This is possibly a big topic, but in the context of your concern or fear or suspicion that if the EU was to disintegrate, then the spectre of far-right politics was going to dominate, it seems to me that you see the EU as the guarantor for human rights and peace and stability, or at least for some attempt at progressive politics. I wonder then, from your position, if I understand it correctly, how you would comment on Fortress Europe as a guarantor of human rights and progressive politics, and I mean specifically in the context of non-European migrants and refugees being stuck very much in Greece and Bulgaria, very much on the border with Bulgaria and Macedonia.
Yeah.
I just wonder what kind of a guarantor that actually is.
Well, thank you for the question. This is
yeah.
a brilliant question, and it also gives you an opportunity to set the record straight. I don't think that you heard me say that the EU is a guarantor of human rights, civilization, propriety, and decency. I never said that. One of the campaigns that Diem has been running is against the EU treaty with Turkey on refugees. It is a scandal. We should be deeply ashamed as Europeans that the EU signed that treaty with President Erdogan of Turkey. Effectively, what the EU did in this context was to bribe an increasingly authoritarian president of Turkey so that he would allow us to violate our commitments in international law to refugees. So I was never interested or likely to defend the EU as a stalwart of human rights and decency. No. What I am saying is that the collapse of the EU is not going to make things better in this regard, it's going to make things worse.
I'm going to make this final question. It is a submitted question. It's Richard. Where are you, Richard? Margerison? Is it Margerison? Margerison? Sorry, Margerison. Margerison. Got it. Hey,
really
Richard. Go. This is going to be the final question. No pressure. Make it a good one.
Oh, no pressure. So there's a great belief now that globalization has undermined the working class economically. Is there a way that we can reformulate globalization so it works in favor of the working class instead of against them?
A positive form of globalization, truly pro-worker globalization. What would that look like?
Well, the problem with globalization as a concept is that it's become associated. It has conflated two things that should not be conflated. Human society has been globalizing ever since we left Africa as a species.
You're not buying into that evolution thing, are you?
Oh, I have been known to be infected by this idea, yes. As an internationalist and somebody who was influenced by Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and Friedrich Engels, let's not forget Friedrich. This amazing, beautiful part of the Communist Manifesto in which they are describing the way in which the bourgeoisie, the international bourgeoisie, globalization in today's term, is battering down the Chinese walls of prejudice by means not of cannons, but the low prices of their commodities, and therefore portraying capitalism as a force of good and progress, bringing down prejudice. Okay, I share this. The idea that you build walls and you recoil behind them, and in splendid isolation from the rest of the world, you create a good society, is repugnant to me. You do not create a good society, you create a parochial kind of vile authoritarianism behind walls. But the problem is that when we talk about globalization, we're not talking about the 19th century, we're not talking about the 11th century, we're not talking about 5,000 BC. We're talking about a specific phenomenon, which is the globalization of capital. We're talking about the freedom of capital to go from one part of the world to another at the touch of a button, whereas people are not allowed to cross, while at the same time we're building fences between the United States and Mexico, between Europe and Morocco, between Greece and Turkey, and so on, and then within our own countries, in Belfast, between Austria and Germany, I mentioned that before. This combination of the freedom of money to move around, completely unimpeded by any control, whereas people are not free to move around. If this is globalization, it's of course working against the interests of humanity. So what we need is to unleash humans, to allow them to travel, while at the very same time coming to a multilateral agreement, whether it's within the EU or bilateral agreements, is neither here nor there, where we allow people to stay and live within their communities in dignity, with social housing, with health education provisions, with a minimum wage that provides them the capacity to live decently, so that they can move freely when they want to move, not because they have to. Because the great scourge of Europe today, and not just Europe, America and so on, is a combination of involuntary underemployment in your own community, which leads to involuntary migration away from your community. The masses of Bulgarians, of Romanians, of Poles, of Greeks, of Portuguese that came to the British Isles did not come because of the weather or the food. They came because they had no alternative, because they could not survive where they were. So, yes to proper globalization, which must be supported by provisions of basic goods in people's own communities, so people don't have to leave their communities. People can live in dignity in their communities, and then they can be Odysseus and travel around if they feel like it.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Oh yeah, go for it at the end. Well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for great questions. They've been great questions, haven't they? Great questions.
Absolutely.
Calm. I'm going to finish. Stop. You're being oppressive over there. Step back. Thank you to everybody here for great questions. I said at the start of the evening that Yanis is incredibly generous as a thinker. And that's really obvious in the conversation we've had. I just think you could throw anything out.
My daughter says that I'm a blabbermouth and I can't stop speaking.
No, take the compliment. You do speak, but you make space. You make space for other people who want to have a conversation with you, which I think is really lovely. We're going to give an opportunity for the people in the studio to have some books signed by Yanis. He does have a habit of writing more and more books, and we'll give you a chance to do that as well. So since you've been here and they've been out there, they're going to get that chance first. I think that's only fair, isn't it? But can you join me now in thanking our wonderful guests this evening in Belfast? Yanis, thank you. Fantastic. Now you can come in. Come on in. All right. Welcome. The establishment, ladies and gentlemen, the establishment is here.
GM25 Belfast is the establishment.
Okay, as William was saying, I want to tell you a little bit about what you can do in the next minutes and hours. And of course, in the first few minutes, the studio space through there is where book signing will be happening. But you can buy books in more than one place. You can buy them in there. But For you guys, it would be in this auditorium here. It would be best if you moved through to the front if you wanted to buy a book ready and waiting. Of course, you are also very welcome to leave in a few minutes too, if that's what you would prefer to do. And of course...
Thank you for that freedom. We appreciate it.
I don't want to see you trapped here with books in hand. And also the other thing to say is, of course, you can be joining DM25 if you like. And there's some cards around if you'd like to leave your details if you want to be onto the mailing list for DM in Belfast here, and I'm sure we'll be meeting soon. So, yeah, do think about doing that in the next...
Or just come to the pub with us afterwards, that's another option.
That's it. And there are people in red T-shirts like this to help you go where you need to go. Okay?
Brilliant, thank you. Yanis Varoufakis, everyone. Brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic, it was great. I'll show you in there.